In our last class, we studied Lakshmana Temple in Khajuraho as our example of Hindu sacred architecture in India. So what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be moving beyond the borders of India to see the impact of Hindu architecture as Hinduism moves outward from India to other parts of Asia. So this movement from India outwards of both Hinduism and ultimately Buddhism as well happens over trade routes, both over land and over water, and takes place over about a 700-year period. Well, one of the places that Hinduism spread to is what we think of as common day as current day Cambodia. And so we're going to be looking at a vast area that is known as Angkor. Now, Angkor is a 70 square mile area that was controlled from about the 9th to the 15th centuries by a family of kings known as the Khmer Dynasty. Now, what marked the Khmer Dynasty is, and they were Hindu for most of that time. Ultimately, they would convert to Buddhism. But the kings all believed that they were what they call Deva Raja. And so, for example, if one of the kings primarily worships Vishnu, let's say, then what he represents himself as to his people is he believes that he is the physical manifestation of Vishnu on earth during his reign, and that at the time of his death, he would then be reabsorbed into Vishnu. Now, because of this belief, what each of these Khmer kings did when they came to the throne is they would start the construction of a great, huge, new, beautiful, ornate Hindu temple that was intended to surpass any of the temples built by earlier kings. And they thought of that temple as a temple mountain. And so here we go back to that idea that we talked about with Lakshmana Temple, the idea of the temple being a sacred cave within a sacred mountain. And so the temple itself is a temple mountain. What we are seeing yet again is the phenomenon where political rulers are using their people's religious beliefs as a way of increasing their own political power. And they do this by using the tools of architecture and art. Now, when they do this, how exactly does that serve them politically? One thing it does is that it communicates. It's like them saying, I have the power and the wealth to get this massive thing constructed. Another thing that it says is, if I'm building a temple, then this shows that I am very, very devout, and this makes me look good in the eyes of my people. The third thing is that it communicates that the temple is for everyone, suggesting that the king is taking care of his people by fulfilling their religious needs. And finally, it's communicating that the king is blessed by the gods by being able to build this huge temple. So the temple that we are looking at right here is a Hindu temple that is called Angkor Wat. Now, again, this is one of dozens of Hindu and ultimately Buddhist temples built throughout this huge 70 square mile complex of Angkor. The builder of Angkor Wat was the ruler who we know as Suryavarman II, and he was a follower of Vishnu. And so he builds Angkor Wat as a temple mountain dedicated to his patron deity Vishnu. Now, this is perhaps the largest religious complex on the face of the earth. And let's take just a moment to try to absorb just how vast this temple complex is. The first thing is I want us to understand that there is a moat that goes all the way around the temple. If you were going to walk to the perimeter of this moat, you would be walking 3.5 miles. Each of the long sides is about a mile, and then the short sides are about 3/4 of a mile. Wow. Now, if you wanted to try to swim across the moat, it's 820 feet across. So think of that as just less than the length of 3 football fields placed end to end. When I visited this site, simply walking from the beginning of the moat, across the moat, through the first of these gates, and on down to the temple itself was about a 10-minute walk. It is absolutely immense. So when we look at this, I want us to remember that the prototype for this is the kind of Hindu temple that we saw in Khajuraho. So let's go down and let's take a look at ways in which this temple is very similar to Khajuraho, yet it is much, much, much more vast and complex. So we're looking at the plans for both of them here. Here's Khajuraho at the bottom and Angkor Wat at the top. We can see that both of them function as sacred diagrams, as mandalas, and that they represent both 2 and 3D sacred diagrams of the cosmos, with a axis mundi in the center of the womb chamber, or the garbhagriha, which would go up and down, connecting the heavenly and the earthly realms, while it's also is oriented in the 4 cardinal directions representing the earth. In addition to that, It also employs those techniques for providing for moving toward ever more sacred space, where one is going through walls, through gates as a kind of transition, and then going circumambulating around areas. That same kind of circumambulation is going to happen at Angkor Wat, as happened at Lakshmana. In addition to that, it involves going upwards in altitude, going to ever higher places. Each time you come through a gate, you'd be going upstairs to get to a higher place. And also each time we go through one of these places, we go to ever smaller enclosed areas. Angkor Wat is actually a complex within 5 walls. And so there are 2 exterior walls that we can't see on this plan right here that the worshiper would have come through before being able to enter. Once they come in, what we have is what represents is 5 interior towers. And so let's go back and let's look at that. So 1, 2, 3, 4, representing the foothills of the Himalayas, same as we talked about with Lakshmana Temple, and then 1 in the center, representing the home of the gods, Mount Kailasha, which is sometimes referred to as Mount Meru. And so when we look at this, I also want us to remember that when the worshiper would come in, they would circumambulate. And remember that, again, this is always in a clockwise direction. And as they circumambulate these galleries, there are bas-reliefs that go all the way around the perimeter. We're going to be looking at one of those in just a minute. And so once they circumambulate that, and they come in, they circumambulate this part right here, they would come ever closer, and they would be going upstairs and circumambulating the interior part before ultimately ending up at the Garbhagriha, or the womb chamber. And so that is one similarity between Lakshmana Temple and Angkor Wat. Another thing that is very, very obvious by looking at the exterior appearance of these is that they are very ornately carved. And so we go back to that notion of ornamentation as being auspicious, as representing the generosity of the gods in their gifts toward humankind. We also see that notion of the hills representing the Himalayas, and then the highest mountain in the middle representing Mount Kailasha, or Mount Meru. Another similarity that we have between Lakshmana Temple here on the left and Angkor Wat is that, again, as the worshiper would circumambulate, they would be pausing to look at and contemplate on and meditate on the stories of the deities that are represented in the sculptural ornamentation of the building. So let's take a look at what is the most famous of the sculptural ornamentations that's found at Angkor Wat. We're looking here at one side of one of those long galleries, at the longest bas-relief in the world. This is known as the churning of the ocean of milk. So let's take a closer look at this. We're looking at the very, very center. The story that this is telling is that there was an early time. In early times, there was a real struggle between the forces of good and the forces of evil. So on one side are the deities, which represent good, and on the other side are the demons, which represent chaos and disorder. But none of these, neither the gods nor the demons, had immortality. So Vishnu came up with a plan for how they could get immortality. He suggested that all of the gods and the demons work together, because this is going to be a huge task. So the plan is they all went out over the ocean of milk, and they lined up in a huge long line facing the center. And what they picked up and used as a rope was the cosmic serpent that has 7 heads. And so the demons held one half of it, and the gods held the other half. And in the center, Vishnu stood on top of a holy mountain. And then what would happen is that when the demons would pull their side, and then the gods would pull their side, and they would take turns pulling, and the other side pulling, going the back and forth direction, which caused the holy mountain here to rotate and churn the ocean of milk. So as this churning happened, 14 really cool things were released from the ocean of milk. One of these things were these divine female fertility spirits that are known as apsaras, again representing the generosity of the gods. But the final thing that is released from this churning of the ocean of milk is the elixir of immortality. Now, the plan had been that everyone would get to drink from this magic potion of immortality. However, Vishnu grabs the elixir of immortality, makes sure that all of the gods drink it, but he does not allow the demons to drink it. So what does this story represent? This story represents the battle between good and evil, and represents also the ultimate triumph of the forces of good and order over the forces of chaos and disorder. The churning of the ocean of milk bas-relief would have been in this gallery that we are looking at right here, going all the way from one end down to the other. So these 5 towers in the center, the original appearance of these towers, we believe that the walls were covered in plaster, and then that gold was applied to the top of these. So we can just imagine how dazzling this building would have looked when it was on a bright sunny day. Now, where I want us to go now is we're going to actually go inside this part right here, and I'm going to show you going up the stairs so that we can look at a little bit of the interior of Angkor. Wat. So now this again is Lakshmana. We're going to ignore that for right now, but this is the line that I stood in while I was waiting to go up those stairs into that upper gallery. This is one of those four corner towers representing a foothill. And so then once you get up into that area, you come to these different shrines. Now, I want us to understand that with the death of Suryavarman II, his son, Jayavarman VII, came to the throne. He converts to Buddhism. And so he's going to convert the Hindu temple that his father had constructed into a Buddhist temple. And so when we go into the Garbhagriha today, what we have is a Buddhist image instead of a Hindu image. After the death of his father, Jayavarman VII ultimately is going to come to power. As I said, he has converted to Buddhism. And what he is going to go on and do is a vast, huge construction project where over his rule, he is going to build more temples than all of the earlier Khmer kings put together. The city that he constructs in order to do this is known as Angkor Thom. And we are seeing one of the gateways here into Angkor Thom, the city, by Jayavarman VII. I want you to notice that this gateway has a face on it. We're not exactly sure who that face is. Is that intended to be the king? We're going to take up that question in just a second. There is another moat that goes all the way around Angkor Thom. And as with the moat that goes around Angkor Wat, that moat is intended to represent the cosmic ocean. And what we have on the balustrade, just as we did at Angkor Wat, on one side we've got the gods holding the cosmic serpent. On the other side we've got the demons holding the other end of the cosmic serpent. So as we go inside the city of Angkor Thom, the main temple of the many temples that Jayavarman VII constructed is known as Bayon Temple. And this is not a temple that just has five towers like his father Angkor Wat's did. Instead, this temple has 54 towers. And all of these, and again, this is a Buddhist temple, but all of these towers have four faces, one face on all four sides. Now, we are not completely clear what these faces are intended to represent. Some think perhaps it's a representation of Jayavarman himself. Others believe that they are intended to represent the bodhisattva of compassion named Lokeshvara. And in case we haven't yet talked about what a bodhisattva is a Buddhist being who delays his own enlightenment out of compassion to try to help everyone else also achieve enlightenment. And so we think that perhaps what Jayavarman claimed in that tradition of the Deva Raja was that he was the physical manifestation of the bodhisattva of compassion, Lokeshvara, and that perhaps these faces may be a representation of the bodhisattva of compassion. We're not completely sure about that, but to the extent that the other temple, Angkor Wat, was ornate and overwhelming, then Angkor Thom and all of its temples are equally overwhelming, as we see here with the Bayon Temple. This is an example, a detail that shows some of those faces on the sides of those towers. Now, after the fall of the Khmer Dynasty, many of the temples that had been constructed over the ages, over the time of the Khmer rule, were abandoned and simply taken over by the jungle, like this one that we see right here. Famously, one of these temples appeared in a 2001 action movie called Lara Croft, Tomb Raider. On the other hand, many of these temples have been used continuously since the conversion of the local people to Buddhism, and Angkor Wat continues to be a Buddhist temple up to the present day. So as we think about the entire Angkor complex, I want us to remember to think about, first of all, ways in which the Hindu temple of Lakshmana is reflected in the Hindu temple of Angkor Wat. I also want us to think about how this is that phenomenon of a political leader using religious beliefs to support his own power.